3D Mario has quite the storied history. What began as a series of vast, vibrant playgrounds with expressive movement systems evolved into more experimental yet straightforward linear obstacle courses, and has embodied every state of being in between. Super Mario Odyssey is simultaneously a return to form and a new direction for 3D Mario. The game was marketed as a spiritual successor to 64 and Sunshine, as it was the first since those titles to feature open, sandbox levels containing multiple objectives. Each game released after Sunshine marked a greater commitment to linear, stage-based games for the foreseeable future, despite the fact that that sandbox structure was remembered with more fondness by fans with each passing year. Finally getting a new entry that promised to return to the series' roots and buck the dissatisfying elements of the modern titles was cause for optimism. Now that Odyssey has been in our hands for close to a decade at this point, I can definitively say it doesn't quite feel like those older games. It doesn't even really feel like anything we've seen from Mario before or since. As a matter of fact, if I were to draw a comparison, I'd say I'm reminded most of Zelda Breath of the Wild if it were a Mario game. Super Mario Odyssey released in 2017 for the Nintendo Switch, the hot, shiny new Nintendo console at the time. Breath of the Wild came out 8 months earlier, right alongside the launch of the system. These two games were responsible for carrying the system through its launch window, and selling fans both new and old on these classic franchises. Undoubtedly, there was pressure within the development teams to innovate, and push the boundaries of what could constitute a 3D Mario or Zelda game, what with the disastrous flop of the Wii U. It's easy to understand why the design of one would inform the other, especially with such similar development timelines. Breath of the Wild is the first open-world 3D Zelda game, a radical departure from any notions of conventional Zelda design. Many of the hallmarks of Zelda, like dungeons for example, have been broken up into smaller, more digestible chunks. Shrines and divine beasts can be completed in virtually any order you desire, but in that freedom, they sacrifice complexity. As a result, many players were left unfulfilled and underwhelmed by the game's puzzle challenges, as all the dungeon equivalents share the same visual identity, and they're over quite fast. Just like shrines, Koroks can be found nearly everywhere. These guys will give you Korok seeds that you can trade in to upgrade your inventory capacity. There are 900 of them in the world, so you'll never be lacking in opportunities to discover them. Breath of the Wild's world is big. Because of the game's emphasis on non-linearity, there is no expectation of the player to complete any singular divine beast, shrine, or fully explore any region. To compensate, you saturate the world with enough key items for most players to be able to get by, and hope that that motivates further exploration of the world. The trade-off of this design approach is that trying to see all that Breath of the Wild has to offer is like trying to drink the entirety of the ocean with a straw. This element of the game has been the main target of criticism for years now. Casting a wide net across the world will inevitably lead to ideas that are not totally fleshed out or simply just bloat. Super Mario Odyssey is the first sandbox Mario title since Sunshine, but the game's interpretation of what it means to be a sandbox Mario is markedly different from what veteran players may expect. 64 and Sunshine stages were open zones that housed anywhere from 6 to 11 different objectives, each with their own level select. If you wanted to obtain the "Can the Eel Come Out to Play" star, you had to deliberately select that star on the menu after jumping into the painting. These stages would morph to integrate whatever challenge the player is engaging in, despite taking place in the same world. What Odyssey does is place you in a massive open stage, about 5 times the size of anything in 64 or Sunshine, that is packed to the brim with collectibles to find. But before we fully unpack that, let's take a step back. Odyssey begins right in the heat of action. A duel between Mario and Bowser that ends with Mario being knocked off the airship, and his iconic cap being torn to shreds. Bowser reveals his intention of marrying Princess Peach, who is evidently opposed to this idea. Mario finds himself awoken in a colorless world engulfed in fog, next to a little ghost that runs off with the remaining piece of his cap. After catching up to the ghost, Mario learns his name is Cappy, and his sister was also kidnapped by Bowser to be used as a prop in the wedding. Having identified a common enemy, the two decide to team up and give chase to Bowser to save his victims. Together, they travel across the world visiting different kingdoms in search of Bowser in a ship called the Odyssey. The important thing about the Odyssey is that it sources its energy from Power Moons, which are the game's main collectible. Power Moons are given as a reward for just about everything in the game, in contrast to 3D Marios of the past. Whether you're completing a platforming challenge, beating a boss, or simply performing a ground pound on a glowing spot on the ground, the game will give you a Power Moon. Objects or challenges that may have given a 1-up mushroom, or even coins, in past 3D Mario games would likely give you moons in Odyssey. This is why I drew the comparison to Breath of the Wild earlier, because in my view, Power Moons function most similarly to Korok Seeds. Super Mario Odyssey has a total of 880 unique Power Moons to discover, with the word unique doing quite a bit of heavy lifting. It's no secret that many of the objectives you'll be completing are rehashed at multiple points throughout the game. The sheer number of Power Moons present in the world is already contentious enough, but the reuse of content in that manner makes the conversation around this game even more heated. I definitely have mixed feelings on this topic, so I'd like to lay them all out and hopefully arrive at some semblance of a conclusion. Let's start with the positives. Structuring progression in this way incentivizes the player to engage with every facet of the game's world, which promotes thorough exploration. Because of how abundant these moons are, you are always making meaningful progress toward your objective, no matter what it is you're doing or where you decide to go. Aside from main story objectives in each kingdom, the tasks you'll be completing can usually be tackled within a minute or two, which gives the game a really nice sense of flow. That flow is facilitated by the game's removal of the boot-out system of past Mario titles. 64 and Sunshine would kick you out of the level you're in as soon as you obtain the main collectible, barring some exceptions. In my video on Mario 64, I played the fan-made PC port of the game with an option that disables the booting out after collecting a star. What I found was that the pace of the game was much smoother, and the only downsides were elements of the stage design that would have required fundamental changes to accommodate. Super Mario Odyssey maintains that same sense of pacing, while sidestepping issues related to level design. Collecting moons is just as rewarding as it was to collect stars in the PC port of 64, even in spite of the disproportionate numbers. There's this infectiously triumphant jingle that plays whenever you collect a moon that feels scientifically engineered to produce the highest amount of dopamine in your brain possible. I simply never get tired of hearing it. If you plan ahead, you'll be able to obtain a couple of Power Moons in a row at multiple points, and chaining like 3 or 4 of them together is indescribably satisfying. 462 of the total Power Moons in the game are obtainable before beating the game, and only 124 of those are needed to reach the final boss fight. What this means is that no two any% runs of this game will ever look quite the same. If you really wanted to, you could bank a bunch of moons in the Sand and Wooded Kingdoms and completely skip over the Lake Kingdom. No 3D Mario game since 64 has allowed for that level of flexibility. The biggest issue with the amount of moons is that the game is stretched as thin as it can possibly get. It's not very often that the game presents you with a particularly meaty or memorable challenge, and the moments where it does are mostly reserved for your first foray into a newly unlocked kingdom. What you're left with are tasks like carrying seeds over to pots, or rounding up sheep, or at worst, just walking up to a moon that's sitting there out in the open waiting for you to grab it. In fairness, finding the seeds and sheep do require a bit of exploration of the kingdom you're in, but if they weren't repeated as often as they are, they would not be the slightest bit memorable. And they're never as engaging tasks to complete as even the worst levels in something like Galaxy or 3D World. The seeds in particular can be among the most tedious objectives in the game. Finding them is the real challenge, but then you spend the next 2 minutes after doing so delivering it to its pot. And then you've got to wait 20 minutes for the sprout to grow to collect your star. There's a specific moon in the Lost Kingdom that I feel is worth mentioning here. It's called Jump Down to the Top of a Tree. You'll never believe what it asks you to do. Yep, you just have to notice the moon right out in the open and jump down from the nearby ledge. That's it. I can excuse moons like this in the first couple of kingdoms, but the Lost Kingdom is halfway through the game. I think it's fair to expect a little bit more from players by now. The Lost Kingdom only has 35 moons of its own, so ones like this that occupy those limited slots are pretty disappointing. I found the title of this moon so incredibly on the nose, and frankly, it's shocking that there weren't talks to scale things back a bit when the developers are naming objectives things like jump down to the top of a tree. Super Mario Odyssey feels like too many little tasks, and not enough substantial tasks. This point will ultimately come down to personal preference. Maybe you prefer being able to explore an enormous kingdom at your leisure, but as somebody whose favorite 3D Mario game is Galaxy, I find myself missing those more focused objectives from time to time. I touched on it a bit earlier, but repetition is the second big problem I have with this game's structure. In any given kingdom, you can expect to see variations of the same basic challenge, and sometimes not even variations, they're just lifted straight out of other kingdoms. Among those repeated objectives are chasing down bunnies, capturing binoculars and looking up at the sky, catching birds flying around, fishing with Lakitu, walking a dog around, playing slots, talking to Princess Peach, searching for and talking to Captain Toad, making Goombas fall in love, playing a certain song for Toad, searching for Bonnetons on NPCs' heads, entering paintings, stunning lurkers in the ground, throwing and holding Cappy on a glowing spot, and walking in a certain shape as accurately as possible. This is a pretty conservative list, by the way. I tried to keep it to tasks that truly differ very little across kingdoms. The thing is, I will defend almost all of these in isolation. The problem is just how often they reappear virtually unchanged. I remember on my first playthrough originally thinking the dog is just there to be cute, and then finding out that by playing catch with him, he can actually lead you to a moon was really cool. The Sphinx is always a hoot to interact with. Something about the correct answer sound effect, combined with his unserious demeanor, makes me love grabbing every single moon associated with him. The first time I saw a glowing bird flying around, realizing that it was carrying a moon, and then trying to catch it on its flight path made me look at the smaller details of the game's world in a new light. It was actually that moon that made me realize just how much there is to find in each kingdom, but that moment was diminished by every subsequent bird I found. I enjoyed talking to Peach in every kingdom. I thought it was exciting that she got to ditch her damsel in distress role for the rest of the game and explore the world on her own terms. But it's hard to not let the constant rehashing of other objectives across the game sour these moments as well. I want to stress that I believe I have a pretty good tolerance for recycled bullshit in this game. For example, I really enjoy the Koopa races in each world, even when they make you play them a second time after beating the game, with the only alteration being a slightly faster Koopa to contend with. It's a lot of fun to test your knowledge of both Mario's movement and the layout of the world you're in, and lowering your best time with each subsequent race is genuinely really satisfying. I also like the scarecrows that activate a short platforming challenge after throwing Cappy onto them. None of them are ever very difficult, but I'll honestly take any excuse I can to apply the skills I've developed with Mario's movement. And for new players, I think they're a good way to help them practice the timing for certain jumps, and condition them into maintaining a sense of flow in their movement. Hell, I'll even defend the shopping moons. You know, those ones where you just walk up to the crazy cap shopkeeper and buy a moon for 100 coins? Some have argued that these are Odyssey's version of the 100 coin stars from past Mario games. And if you frame them that way, sure, they're a pretty lousy replacement. I'll talk about what in my view serves the true replacement for those stars in time, but as for the shopping moons, they exist to reinforce the idea that you are rewarded for engaging with literally every aspect of this game's world, and as a support system for players who may find themselves struggling in certain kingdoms. Are these moons fun to collect? Not particularly. But in a game with as many filler moons as Odyssey, these are not the first ones I'd criticize. To reiterate, it is not necessarily my belief that these moons are all tedious. The great thing about Odyssey is that, as I said before, the vast majority of these objectives can be completed very quickly. That, coupled with the removal of the boot-out system from past Mario games, makes grabbing all those moons feel effortless. The problem I have is that hardly any singular moons are all that memorable. Aside from the main story objectives in each kingdom, the moons I remember the best are those interesting one-offs like the jump rope challenge in the Metro Kingdom and the long 2D level in the Mushroom Kingdom. There are a ton of tasks the game asks you to complete that are similar to others you will already have done. Just to name a few, the taking notes missions, ground pounding glowing spots, collecting 5 moon shards, dressing up for various NPCs, and hint art. Again, I wouldn't say any of these are necessarily bad, but if you seek out most of this game's content, you'll really get the feeling that the developers should have come up with more ideas, or cut back a bit. Put simply, the content in this game does not justify its length or amount of collectibles, and that's the biggest issue I have with Odyssey. It's funny, going into this project, I expected to be singing an entirely different tune. When I reflected on Mario Odyssey prior to this recent playthrough, the moments that stuck out to me were the big set pieces in each kingdom, specific memories I'd made uncovering niche secrets, or blitzing through uniquely themed obstacle courses. Surely people were exaggerating the extent of the objective reuse, but no. By the time I'd collected about 450 moons, I found myself agreeing with those commonly made arguments. Despite Odyssey being hailed as a return to the classic style of 3D Mario by Nintendo, this is an issue none of those original games ever had. It is not feasible to replay for 100% the same way that 64 and Sunshine are, and so I'm left questioning how much of a revival it truly is. But with all that being said, I still find myself returning to this game time and time again. Those elements that keep me coming back are so strong that it makes putting up with the game's bloat well worth it. One of said elements is the game's exquisite movement system. The sandbox variety of 3D Mario games are renowned for their robust movement options. 64 established a pretty impressive and enjoyable baseline. Sunshine expanded upon it and gave us the deepest moveset a Mario game has ever seen, and then every subsequent entry stripped it down to the most fundamental elements. Odyssey brings back most of the moves from the first 2 games, and adds plenty of its own on top of those. The dive makes its triumphant return, allowing for a burst of forward momentum mid-air. You can now roll on the ground, which is much faster than simply walking, but allows for far less directional control on the fly. You can ground pound into a jump, which gives you a little bit of extra height without having to reorient yourself or get a running start. Moves like the triple jump and wall jump have much larger windows for inputs, so they're easier to pull off and more reliable than ever, which feels great. Moves like the side somersault, backflip, etc. are all here as well, and they help provide plenty of movement options for any kind of situation you may encounter. Mario's hat companion, Cappy, has his own set of mechanics he brings with him. The most important utility he provides is the ability to bounce off of him. It sounds very simple, but that's the beauty of Mario Odyssey's movement tech. Once you come to understand the use cases for each move and get comfortable with performing them, you'll start thinking of ways you can chain them into other moves. The combo you'll be using the most is the triple jump into cap throw, into dive, into cap throw, into dive. This gives you a ton of height and distance and a relatively straightforward move that isn't difficult to pull off. Another one of my favorites is the spin jump into ground pound into roll. This gives you a ton of forward momentum without even needing to move very far. This is a trick speedrunners use quite a bit, and it's actually pretty easy to pull off. It feels incredibly good to do, and it has limitless use cases. Here's an example of how you might combine some of these moves together to complete a given objective. In the Sand Kingdom, there's a moon called On Top of the Stone Archway, which you're intended to capture a bullet bill from higher up on the Tostarena Ruins gauntlet and fly it over to the archway. But there's actually another way to grab this moon. The nearby icicles can be climbed up using some smart movement. And what I did was backflip up this first one, cap bounce onto the second higher one, and then long jump into cap throw, into dive, into bounce, and into another dive. Now that I've nearly mastered this game's controls, this isn't very hard to do, but in the third kingdom of the game, where you haven't been faced with many platforming challenges yet, new players may find some difficulty with that method. But the reason I highlighted this example in particular is because the icicles you would use to climb up to the archway actually have invisible coins on them, which implies the developers wanted you to get up there. It's an acknowledgement that this is an option for collecting the moon too. It doesn't exactly take any crazy speedrun tactics or glitches to make it there, Anybody can do it after just a couple of hours of experimentation, and this isn't even the only example. Underneath the Sand Kingdom, there's a big lead up to the region's boss fight, which sees you flying a bullet bill through various obstacles in this temple area. You may not think it at first, but with some ingenuity, you can actually get up on top of the walls here, and you're rewarded quite handsomely if you choose to do so. All across the game, there are these mini challenges you'll find that might not even reward you with a moon, but rather a couple of coins and intrinsic pride in your accomplishment. It tells me that the developers were well aware of the fact that they've created the deepest and most flexible moveset in Mario's 3D history. Did you know that it's possible to jump from the landing area in the Metro Kingdom to the mainland without ever even touching the Spark Pylon? Or that you can completely skip the cave in the Moon Kingdom? And probably dozens of other outrageous things that I'm not even aware of. Speedrunners have figured out all kinds of ways to get the most out of Mario's movement, like roll cancels, vectoring, rainbow twirls, and more, at a level that not even Super Mario 64 speedruns can rival. I'd recommend giving some of the Any% runs a look, they're incredible. If there's one complaint I have with this moveset, it's that the long jump can feel somewhat obsolete. If you want to travel on the ground quickly, rolling is your best bet. And if you want to cross large gaps, the cap bounce dive gives you more verticality and distance. The long jump has been nerfed from its Galaxy rendition, yielding much less range. This leads to a lot of bonking and ensuing death, at least for me personally, since I'm so used to those games. There are definitely times where the long jump is useful, but rarely is it required. Though, I suppose more options are better than less in this regard. Odyssey has hands down my favorite movement system in any 3D platformer I've ever played. It is adaptable, simple yet deep, and endlessly satisfying to master. I can't even tell you how many hours I've sunk into this game just toying around with the movement. It's that good. The other feature that Cappy boasts, and is one of the most iconic elements of Odyssey, is the capture mechanic. Captures are essentially this game's version of power-ups, and they're a worthy replacement. They take the versatility of power-ups from across the series and multiply that by 1,000. Frogs can be captured for extra jump height, bullet bills can be captured to quickly travel horizontally, Gushions allow for a more fluid version of Flood's hover nozzle from Sunshine, and there are plenty more. Aside from captures like trees, cacti, and letters, most of the captures give you brand new abilities that can be applied in a variety of ways. There's something very novel about embodying classic enemies that have existed in Mario games for decades and being able to utilize their unique traits. For me, a prime example are the Hammer Bros. In prior titles, they would only throw a single hammer every few seconds, but in Odyssey, while capturing them, you can spam throw them and plow through hordes of enemies. This capture just makes you feel incredibly powerful. It's an awesome way to do fan service while also creating meaningful gameplay scenarios. The final capture of the game is Yoshi, who can be used in the Mushroom Kingdom and a few select secret areas. He maintains his flutter jump that we all know and love, but his tongue has far more utility than it has ever had before. You can use it to cling to walls, or stick it on the ground and let it pull you forward to gain a speed boost. Capturing enemies doesn't ever just feel like you get one new ability tacked onto your already existing toolkit. It feels like you're playing a fundamentally different game. Some people dislike how much capturing things disrupts your base moveset, but I find it to be a great new take on Mario power-ups. Every capture has its own entirely unique moveset, and that allows for a host of different challenges to exist in the game built around these abilities. They give platforming a strong sense of variety, and these abilities are tested most frequently in the game's secret levels. In every kingdom in the game, you'll find things like secret doors, pipes, and pits. These transport you to the game's hidden rooms, which, in their totality, contain a big chunk of Odyssey's total moon count. The majority of them ask you to complete some little platforming challenge, similar to the secret stages in Sunshine. Those of you who know my thoughts on said stages in Sunshine are probably expecting me to tear the ones in Odyssey apart, but I actually feel more positively toward them here. For context, the secret stages in Sunshine are consistently the most fun I have playing that game, but what kills them for me is their lack of thematic cohesion with the rest of that game. Sunshine tries so hard to immerse you into its tropical setting, but for some strange reason, would rather send you off into a disconnected void to platform. Well, I'm happy to say that in Odyssey, they've addressed that criticism. Somewhat. Many of the hidden rooms are in fact themed around the kingdoms they're found in, and that's great. You could find yourself in the extensive sewer system of the Metro Kingdom, or the inner workings of the Wooded Kingdom's machinery. I never feel that my immersion in the world has been broken by entering one of these. The problem is that the other half of the game's hidden rooms exist up above the clouds of some nondescript kingdom that have you jumping through the same bland, neon-colored shapes. Not only does it ruin any sense of immersion you may have developed, it's just plain boring. While I remember plenty of the secret areas in places like the Wooded Kingdom or the Sand Kingdom, I have trouble recalling the goal of more than maybe 2 of those abstract ones across the entire game. Mind you, stages like that house a significant proportion of Odyssey's total moon count. That's a real disappointment. I would have preferred if the developers could have integrated some of these platforming gauntlets into the kingdoms themselves. That way, they can maintain their theming and feel like less of a pace breaker. Think the climb to the soup pot in the Luncheon Kingdom. These rooms are never as difficult as the levels in Sunshine, but they provide sufficient platforming experiences. These rooms will typically hone in on a specific mechanic or gimmick, which does help make them a bit more compelling and memorable. Whether you're blazing through rings of coins in the sky with the rocket flower, shooting enemies with the tank capture, or swinging across beams, you're always doing something unique to the room you're in, and that is refreshing, even if their aesthetics make them hard to remember long term. One thing I have to praise these secret zones for is how they handle exploration within them. Each one contains 2 moons. One is your reward for completing the platforming challenge, and the other is hidden somewhere within the level. Often they're pretty difficult to find too, which I really appreciate. There's a secret zone found in the Sand Kingdom that asks you to cross these small, poison-filled rooms via hidden paths. You'll need to capture the moai in each room to make the paths visible. In the first room, you'll notice an anomalous square in the bottom left that serves no purpose. There's also a sign in this room that exists seemingly to warn you about the dangers of the poison, but you'll notice that it's the only one in the entire zone. Putting 2 and 2 together may lead you to interact with this sign, and what do you know, there's a moon. There are definitely some lame hidden moons in these, particularly in a few of the platforming focused ones. Some of these just have you veer slightly off the main path, but generally I find these hidden moons to be some of the most consistently enjoyable to collect throughout the game. As fun as the secret rooms are to platform through and thoroughly search, the opportunities for expressive movement and exploration that Odyssey's kingdoms themselves provide is the true highlight of the game for me. These kingdoms lend credence to the idea that Odyssey is the evolution of Sandbox Mario by modernizing that classic format and creating some of the most compelling regions in any Mario game. The Cap Kingdom is the very first area of the game, and it is emblematic of the fact that this Mario game will be unlike anything you've played in the series. Mario games typically begin in these happy-go-lucky grassy regions that have been routine for decades, and the Cap Kingdom contrasts that with its grayscale environment, the golden moon far off in the sky being the only source of color. The ground you're on is surrounded by a sea of fog, and far off in the distance all around you, you can see hundreds of skyscrapers wearing top hats. The kingdom's inhabitants are these little white top hat ghosts known as Bonnetons that are reminiscent of the familiar Boo enemies from past Mario games, but with a more creative spin. This kingdom is one of the smallest in the game, and on an any % playthrough, it's the one you'll be spending the least amount of time in, so it mostly exists as a tutorial and a tone setter. And that it does quite well. But my favorite thing about it is just how many questions it prompts. Who are these hat people? Where is this hat world located in relation to the Mushroom Kingdom? It was established in the introduction that Mario and Bowser were fighting above the Mushroom Kingdom, and when Mario got knocked off the ship, he couldn't have fallen that far, right? What does the rest of the region look like, given that we can see all those towers on the horizon? What lies under the fog? Is this place just floating up in the sky? You'll find the game consistently prodding at your imagination in this way with each new kingdom you enter, and it is just so refreshing. This is something I praise both 64 and Sunshine for, and it remains one of my favorite elements of those games. So to finally have it back after a decade and a half of linear obstacle course games is cathartic. After beating the boss on Top Hat Tower, you'll head into the Cascade Kingdom, which serves as the game's introductory grass level. But as you walk around a bit, you find that it is much more than that. Cascade has this prehistoric rainforest theme to it, a far cry from other grass-themed levels in any Mario game. The environment is vibrant, the textures are highly detailed, and in the center of the kingdom, there's a massive waterfall flowing out of a Triceratops fossil on a mountain that commands your attention. The kingdom's music is this grandiose, triumphant piece that empowers you to explore, and it makes arriving there for the first time one of the best moments in any Mario game. This kingdom may seem small, but it is quite densely packed, and there are tons of moons hidden in a variety of ways. This kingdom conditions you to search your surroundings thoroughly, which is a critical skill to develop for later parts of the game. The kingdom's main focus is on teaching you the capture ability of the Chain Chomps, but you can also find a T-Rex napping on a hill that you can capture. Taking control of him for the very first time is where this game peaks. Rocks that you previously had to capture a Chain Chomp to break can now be crushed instantly, you can kill any enemy that lies in your path with ease, and you also just feel like a badass walking around as a giant T-Rex. The first time I played Odyssey, this moment demonstrated pure confidence on the part of the developers. If they're pulling this out in the first major kingdom of the game, a kingdom you spend maybe 15 minutes in, what else could they possibly have in store for me? Since the Cascade Kingdom is where the Odyssey is unlocked, let's talk a bit about it. The Odyssey is ostensibly this game's hub world, similar to Galaxy 2's Starship Mario, but with even less to interact with and explore. There's a wardrobe to change clothes, a globe on the outside to deposit power moons in, some shelves to display decorations, and that's it. The Odyssey is so small with so little to do that I can't even really consider it a hub world. It's just a means to travel from one area to another, and that's all it really needs to be considering that these kingdoms are so expansive. I just find it a bit curious that the developers thought to omit a hub world equivalent, given that Peach's Castle and Delfino Plaza are so beloved. But if that's what it took to give us these kingdoms, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. The Sand Kingdom is the third area of Odyssey, and it is the largest kingdom in the game, housing the most power moons. The kingdom draws influence from traditional Mexican and Egyptian culture, which informs the design of its inhabitants and their town, and surrounding architecture respectively. The first region you'll encounter is Tostarena Town, home to maraca-shaking, sombrero-wearing skull guys inspired by the colorful festivities of the Mexican holiday Dia de los Muertos. The town itself is small, but embodies the spirit of its residents. Kingdoms in Mario Odyssey often incorporate cultural traits from across the real world in their designs. The Lake Kingdom's architecture bears a resemblance to that found in Greece. The Snow Kingdom's central town is called Shiveria, a reference to the frigid Siberian region of Russia. One of the rewards you can find here is a set of nesting dolls as decoration for the Odyssey. The Luncheon Kingdom fuses the fine cuisine of Italy with the volcanoes of Pompeii, and the melody of Piranza Plaza was recorded primarily with a mandolin, an instrument invented in Italy. The architecture of Bowser's Kingdom harkens back to stylings of feudal Japan, and the polychromatic clouds in the sky are evocative of some paintings of the era. The Metro Kingdom's New Donk City is not so subtly based on New York City, complete with an Empire State Building equivalent in the center. The numerous ways it specifically references the city is fascinating, and rather than list all of them out to you here, I'll direct you to the Mario Wiki, where you can read about them along with all the other kingdoms I've mentioned. Theming the kingdoms in this way is a fantastic idea, and by drawing from your knowledge of real-world cultures, it really feels like you're embarking on a global tour of the Mario universe. It feels like a more mature take on classic Mario motifs, without entirely abandoning what makes those so appealing. Your region map even includes a little travel pamphlet. How cute. I really appreciate that the developers went through the effort of dreaming up original NPCs for each kingdom, as they could have easily just stuffed these kingdoms with pre-established familiar NPCs from Mario's past. Instead of putting Piantas in the Seaside Kingdom, for example, they created these snail characters that emphasize the kingdom's parallels to French culture. Likewise, there's no Shy Guy, Koopa, or Toad Kingdom, apart from the bonus Mushroom Kingdom, of course. To return to the topic of the Sand Kingdom, you'll be informed that despite being a blazing hot desert, the land has frozen over as a result of Bowser's meddling. The town's central fountain is frozen solid, there are tons of icicles jutting out of the ground all across the kingdom, and the townspeople are in complete panic. On the northeast corner of the kingdom, there is a massive inverted pyramid stuck in the ground. You'll have to platform through its various challenges to reach the top, and bring it back to its natural state of being suspended in the air. Doing so will open up the path to the underground section of the kingdom, which consists of some forgotten structures, but mostly pure ice. This is where you'll find and conquer the source of the problem and bring the kingdom back to its typical boiling temperatures. This is where the Sand Kingdom truly opens up. By this point, you have access to every subregion and secret room in the desert, as some were previously frozen over or otherwise blocked off. Additionally, you can now call a Jaxi whenever you want, which is a jaguar statue that you can ride at breakneck speeds. Jaxi is a lot of fun to ride around, and his speed makes the Sand Kingdom's initially intimidating size very manageable. At night, the kingdom's temperature drops, as you'd expect of a desert, but the music also changes. It becomes this contemplative, ambient piece with beautiful instrumentation throughout. It's one of my favorite tracks in the game, and even the series as a whole. I always stop in my tracks just to take it all in when I get to this part in the story. This isn't even something I'd realized until I went to grab the background music for this video, but Odyssey has easily one of the best soundtracks in Nintendo's history, and would probably be my favorite Mario soundtrack if it weren't for the Galaxy games. What a triumph. The Sand Kingdom strikes a perfect balance of platforming challenge and exploration, scope and pacing, and familiarity and novelty. For that reason, it's one of my favorite kingdoms in the entire game, and it's always a blast to revisit on a new playthrough. Once you leave the Sand Kingdom, you'll hit a fork in the road, and you have the option to go to either the Lake Kingdom or the Wooded Kingdom. You will have to travel to both of them eventually, it's just a matter of which one you'd prefer to do first. I typically travel to the Lake Kingdom first, so let's start there. The Lake Kingdom is a pretty small kingdom, one of the smallest in the game in fact. This kingdom is populated by a race of mermaids known as Lock Ladies. The Lock Ladies are fashion connoisseurs, and Bowser came to the kingdom to extract the cherished Lock Lady wedding dress. Gameplay-wise, this kingdom is probably one of the weakest in the game, as the few challenges that are here aren't anything super memorable or compelling. But what the kingdom lacks in substance, it makes up for in style. The music in the kingdom is pure bliss. It embodies the relaxing, carefree spirit you'd feel swimming in a place like this. The kingdom has a very low-key color palette that's easy on the eyes, and every area of it is very cohesive. I always enjoy spending time here, even if what I'm doing isn't the most engaging. Heading over to the Wooded Kingdom, this kingdom is essentially a massive iron structure that has been integrated into the surrounding forest. The Wooded Kingdom is another one of the biggest kingdoms in the game, and it utilizes that space in a completely different way than the Sand Kingdom. It really adds to the atmosphere by emphasizing the scale of the main structure. And environmental elements like the trees are enormous as well. I'm a sucker for the overgrown, abandoned human structure aesthetic, so the kingdom just works for me on that level. Surrounding the kingdom is a vast mountain range, which ties this kingdom's visual theme together nicely. There's also some sort of biodome reaching across the skies of the kingdom, which has always prompted me to ask myself questions and seek answers through the environment. Spoiler for a later kingdom, but there are in fact regular humans in the world of Mario. Were they conducting some kind of experiment in this region? Or is there some kind of threat on the outside that demands the kingdom be protected? I've always found that aspect of the kingdom's visual design fascinating, because the only inhabitants to it are these robot guys, who seem to exist solely to maintain the plant life. Somebody had to have built them, along with the structures here, right? The other way that the kingdom's size is utilized is the directional design. The Sand Kingdom is mostly flat, with a few structures throughout it. The Wooded Kingdom, however, makes great use of its verticality. You enter the kingdom at its lowest point, and as you complete the story objectives, you make your way upward. The kingdom is littered with all kinds of platforming challenges that are naturally integrated into the environments. By doing this, the kingdom seamlessly blends the gameplay styles of open-world sandbox Mario with traditional linear platforming. This kingdom nails the variety in its objectives, and it makes it an absolute highlight of the game. There's a great moment where you emerge from a silent cave into the central area of the kingdom, and the kingdom's main theme kicks in. It's upbeat, groovy as all hell, and it just makes me want to zip through the platforming sections as fast as I can. Another aspect of the kingdom's verticality is its secret region. Near the starting area, there's this giant sloped wall that you can get on top of right next to the Odyssey. On my first playthrough, I climbed up there and poked around a bit, looking for any sort of collectible I could find. I must have miscalculated a jump or slipped or something, but I fell off the side and into the void. To my surprise, I didn't die. Instead, the screen faded to black with a hat-throwing animation, like it would do if you entered a challenge room, and I watched as Mario fell into this dark, abyssal forest. My jaw subsequently hit the floor. The Deep Woods is about the size of one of the game's smaller kingdoms, and while there isn't a whole lot to do here, the simple act of exploring it is a delight. The area is accompanied only by the ambient sounds of the forest, which works wonders at creating an apprehensive, tense atmosphere. As you begin to wander around, you may hear some loud yet somewhat sparse thuds off in the distance. The darkness of the region is concealing whatever it may be, but you have reason enough to be unsettled. Eventually, the thuds will get louder, and the path you took to get to your current location is looking awfully similar to a couple of surrounding areas. You're probably thinking, shit, how do I get out of here? And then, the T-Rex you captured way back in the Cascade Kingdom appears from behind a tree. This time, he isn't asleep, and he's hungry. This was the situation I found myself in on my first playthrough of Odyssey, and I'll never forget how it made me feel. That sense of genuine terror I'd felt trying to evade this angry T-Rex was unlike anything I'd ever felt playing a Mario game. Everything I've talked about regarding the Wooded Kingdom, its atmosphere, its world design, objectives, music, make it handily my favorite kingdom in the game. I always have a blast in this place, and I savor every moment I spend here. The Lost Kingdom is the next area you'll enter, and it has maybe the most basic aesthetic of all the kingdoms, but in any other Mario game it'd be a standout. It's a poisonous swamp inspired by various islands of Indonesia, and its music evokes that feeling of exploring an uncharted rainforest. One cool thing about this kingdom is that it sees the return of Klepto from Mario 64, who steals your hat in Shifting Sandland. When you first enter the kingdom, he'll swoop down and do the very same thing. Your hat is far more important to you in Odyssey than it is in 64, and I thought that making a whole chase sequence out of this moment was a great way to call back to that game. Aside from that, the Lost Kingdom is a decent enough area, but it's not really touching some of the better kingdoms in the game. One of those better kingdoms is the very next one, the Metro Kingdom. I mentioned earlier that it is based off of New York City, so I don't feel it warrants much more of a description. The kingdom also references Donkey Kong quite heavily, the main example being the fact that the city is called New Donk City. My favorite way it references that series is by naming each street and notable location after characters from Donkey Kong. Dixie Street, K. Rool Avenue, Squawks Park, it's just great. It goes to show how much attention to detail is present in this kingdom, and you'll notice it in a variety of ways while playing. The kingdom is constantly bustling with activity, and even it appears to be undergoing endless construction projects, just like a real American city. The music has this laid-back jazz vibe that perfectly captures the upbeat vibes of this place, and it's catchy as all hell. The interesting thing about this kingdom is that its residents are humans that bear no resemblance to any of the main Mario cast. Mario is much shorter than the New Donkers, and he has more exaggerated, cartoony facial and body features. I really like how despite Mario being in a place that should feel familiar to us as players, it still feels like you're visiting some exotic location only a Mario game could set you in as a result. Like the Wooded Kingdom, the Metro Kingdom utilizes verticality in its level design, a natural product of a world consisting of massive skyscrapers. Jumping around in a realistic world like this feels incredibly organic. I feel like we've all imagined jumping across the tops of buildings in a big city like we're in some kind of parkour movie, and this kingdom harnesses that energy beautifully. You can bounce off the hoods of parked taxis, ride along a power line, or capture orange poles around the city to fling yourself vertically or horizontally at high speeds. There are so many tools this kingdom uses to make the platforming dynamic and novel, and it succeeds greatly. After you rid the city of its pest problem, you'll be asked by the mayor to recruit 4 musicians to play in the city festival. Upon doing so, you'll be able to enter the city's festival state, and what follows is maybe one of the most memorable sequences I've experienced in a Mario game. The sun sets over the city, painting the sky with a soft pink. Pauline and the musicians perform the game's main theme, Jump Up Superstar, while fireworks light up the scene. Mario enters a pipe and emerges in a 2D gauntlet that makes reference to the original Donkey Kong arcade game. While making your way through this thing, there are spotlights shining on the action, and a constant flow of confetti falling down, all while crowds of New Donkers can be seen in the background cheering you on. It's a fairly lengthy, albeit not very challenging level, but it absolutely should not have been. It feels like a true celebration of your accomplishments thus far, and pumps you up to push forward. I think this sequence made me realize that I was playing something truly special, and it still hits me pretty hard all these years later. Leaving the Metro Kingdom will give you yet another fork in the road, this time with the choice being between the Snow and Seaside Kingdoms. We'll first head to the Snow Kingdom. Upon entry, the Snow Kingdom seems like a pretty generic Mario Snow level, but ooh, this time there's a blizzard obscuring your vision. However, once you make your way to the center of the kingdom, you'll uncover a deep hole in the ground that leads to the Chivarian village. It's inhabited by Chivarians, which are these seal-like ball-shaped creatures that I find incredibly adorable. The inside of the village is pretty small, but the main attraction here is the Bound Bowl Grand Prix. There are a couple of other little side rooms to explore here too, but that'll be a discussion for later. There's not a whole lot to this kingdom, but the cute little seal guys and cozy village music make this a fun kingdom to play through. I'm not of the opinion that the Seaside Kingdom is redundant, like many others seem to believe. I'm a big fan of its atmosphere, in fact. It's this cliffside that overlooks a gorgeous blue ocean, and really hones in on the tropical vacation type vibe. Its music fits the area perfectly. It's very laid back, and it just makes you want to stop and take it all in. But what the Seaside Kingdom does have in common with the Lake Kingdom is a lack of interesting objectives. If we're speaking purely on the amount of fun objectives in each kingdom, the Seaside Kingdom would probably be at the very bottom of my ranking. So many of the moons are either just out in the open or require very little thought from the player to collect. There isn't much to keep me interested in staying here beyond the superb atmosphere and cozy music, unfortunately. The Luncheon Kingdom is next on the itinerary, and this is a region themed around food. The locals are all these forks with chef hats, and they take great pride in their stupendous stew, which Bowser stole for use at his wedding. The kingdom has a very striking appearance, with the environment mostly consisting of neon blues, purples, and greens, and the surrounding lava a vibrant bubblegum-like pink. In that sense, I find it to be one of the more memorable areas in the game, but nothing about what the game has you doing here sticks with me after I leave. It can be a rewarding kingdom to fully explore, as there are some cool things to discover like secret challenge rooms, but I would not place it among my favorite kingdoms in the game. Bowser's Kingdom, drawing from feudal Japanese culture, as discussed earlier, makes for a standout kingdom in terms of aesthetics. It's easily my favorite interpretation of Bowser's Fortress, even if the kingdom can be a bit tedious to navigate at times. It can be fun to explore, but it's mostly a linear path to follow that's main purpose is ushering you to the game's final kingdom, the Moon Kingdom. This is Bowser's venue of choice for his wedding with Peach. This weirdly eerie yet serene track looms over you as you explore. The entire kingdom is grayscale, with the exception of the Earth off in the distance. Because you're in space, there's very little gravity, and so every move you make is much floatier and slower paced. Due to that change of pace, I've always dedicated time to reflecting on my journey thus far. It would seem that's what the game wants, as the area you park your ship at is where you have the best view of the Earth, where your entire journey took place. Eventually, the ringing church bells will beckon you toward them, and you'll need to venture through the game's final test. Underneath the Moon Kingdom lies a much more traditional final Mario level, a cave filled with lava and a bangin' rock and roll rendition of Bowser's theme. This gauntlet is more long than it is difficult, but it appropriately sets the tone for the end of the game. As for the end of the game itself, we'll talk about that in due time. But for now, let's continue discussing the kingdoms. After defeating Bowser, you return to the Mushroom Kingdom. This version of the region is reminiscent of Super Mario 64, and it features plenty of direct callbacks to that game. Looking up at the sun in Peach's castle will give you a moon. You can drain the swamp around the castle to access secret areas. There's a Mario 64 outfit that you wear to unlock Peach's courtyard. And of course, you jump through paintings to fight harder versions of previous bosses. This kingdom is not a fully fleshed out area compared to prior ones, despite what its size may lead you to believe. I think it's here just as a neat reward for players who want more from the game, and that's completely fine. It's the perfect way to cap off a game that feels like a celebration of Mario as a franchise by both pushing forward and tastefully calling back to the past. Even though there are a couple of duds, I'm very satisfied with the overall selection of kingdoms in Odyssey. They are the biggest, most elaborate sandboxes the series has ever seen, and they progress the ideas pioneered in 64 to the modern era beautifully. Each kingdom's design does a great job at establishing an atmosphere and motivating you to fully explore it. One of the ways the kingdom does so is the introduction of purple coins. In every kingdom, there are exclusive purple coins to collect, with there either being 50 or 100 in total. Typically in groups of 3 or 4, you find these coins all throughout their respective kingdoms. If you're looking to obtain a specific reward, you can usually get by just searching the main regions of the kingdom, but if you want to find all the coins, you'll need to explore every nook and cranny. Some of these coins are hidden exceptionally well, which I love. I'll take any excuse I can to roam these kingdoms. Searching for purple coins evokes the same feelings as some of the good blue coins from Sunshine, or the Comet Medals from Galaxy 2. These purple coins can be traded in at the Crazy Cap shop in the kingdom, in which you can purchase outfits for Mario or decorations for the Odyssey. Most kingdoms contain a moon that can only be acquired by changing into a region-specific outfit and completing a task. In a sense, I view these moons as the game's substitute for 100 coin stars from past titles. Not because you need 100 coins to obtain them, but because their gameplay styles are functionally the same. Collecting, say, 25 purple coins, which is the cost of purchasing a typical outfit in a kingdom, takes roughly the same amount of effort as collecting 100 coins in any level in 64 or Sunshine. They're just executed a bit differently. Some players lament the moons you get by dancing with NPCs in a specific outfit or being gated out of a secret room due to being inadequately dressed, but viewing these moons this way, I enjoy them a lot. I hear a lot of complaints that write these moons off as simply changing outfits and talking to an NPC, but that disregards all the work it took to collect the purple coins used to purchase the outfit. Hunting for purple coins is one of my favorite things to do in Odyssey, so any task associated with them is bound to be completed when I play. They're a great addition that gives purpose to the openness of the kingdoms. You may have noticed that I left out 2 of the game's kingdoms in my discussion of them all, and that's because I've decided to save them for last, for reasons you are probably aware of if you know which ones I'm talking about. Those 2 kingdoms are the Cloud Kingdom and the Ruin Kingdom. What distinguishes these kingdoms from the others is that they exist solely as boss arenas. On your way to the Metro Kingdom, Bowser will interrupt, and you'll stop at a nearby cloud platform to fight. The odd thing is that this platform is all this kingdom amounts to, and you can return to it to collect a couple of moons after you've beaten the main story. A lot of people seem to dislike the Cloud Kingdom, and while I understand and somewhat agree with the reasoning, I'm kind of happy it's here. I think it's quite novel to have an entire kingdom dedicated to a major boss fight, and I like that you can return to it later on just to knock out a couple of quick objectives, and fully explore all the kingdom has to offer, even if it is pretty tiny and not all that interesting. The second kingdom, the Ruin Kingdom, has a completely different conversation surrounding it, however. This place has a very unique aesthetic. It's this Castlevania-esque, dingy, stormy kingdom with ancient ruins of a castle being the only structure still standing. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in a Mario game, and its atmosphere is immediately intriguing. Then, you travel up to the top, and suddenly you're fighting a massive, highly detailed dragon that looks straight out of Dark Souls. It's an absolute highlight of the game, and as a result, many people expressed disappointment that Crumbledon was not a fully fleshed out kingdom. Some of you may find what I'm about to say baffling, but I think the Ruin Kingdom is perfect as is. That's right, I'm kind of glad it didn't get the full kingdom treatment. The reason it is such a highlight is that it gets in, does exactly what it needs to do, and gets out in a matter of minutes. It leaves you wanting more without feeling dissatisfied. It's probably the only kingdom in this game I can say that about, in fact. Yes, the theming of it is great, but I think its impact would be diminished by letting you spend any more time there than you do as is. So overall, I like the Cloud Kingdom and Ruin Kingdom as they are. They're nice changes of pace, and it's not like they're stand-ins for full kingdoms that never made it to the final game or something. If they didn't exist, nothing would have replaced them. With that in mind, I've never understood the hostility some people hold for these 2. Yeah, they may be a bit underwhelming when compared to something like the Wooded Kingdom, but living up to the standards of the other kingdoms was clearly not the goal here. They're just boss arenas. They didn't have to give these fights their own kingdoms, but I think it's cool that they did, and I wish that could be the perspective people take when discussing these 2 areas. Speaking of boss fights, let's talk about the bosses in Odyssey. The very first one you'll encounter is in the Cap Kingdom on Top Hat Tower. This is where you're introduced to the Brutals, Bowser's rabbit henchmen who are serving as his wedding planners. They'll each crop up at multiple points throughout the game, and they all have their own unique abilities. Topper stacks top hats on his head that you'll need to knock off one by one. Harriet throws bombs at you that can be repelled back at her to make her vulnerable. Rango whips his blade-rimmed hat at you, which can be flipped over to fly into the air and onto his head. And finally, Spewart, who, as the name suggests, sprays poison all over the arena and has a similar weakness to Topper. The Brutals aren't really amazing fights or anything, as they're pretty simple, but I do enjoy what they represent. This era of Mario's history, prior to the release of Odyssey, was characterized as homogeneous, safe, and boring. Every mainline Mario had you fighting either the Koopalings or Boom Boom and Pom Pom, and Bowser was always the final boss. So to finally get some new minion characters to fight was a genuine blessing. You fight a Brutal in damn near every kingdom, so they can feel a bit repetitive. But the one thing about their fights that I actually really like is that every single one of them has some kind of secret exploit you can use to take them down a little faster. For instance, Topper, Spewart, and Rango will all crawl inside of their hats and travel around the arena, and getting hit by them will deal you damage. However, with a well-timed jump, you can force them into their next phase early. Topper has this move where he'll lie on the ground and spin in a circle, with the size of his hat stack determining its area of effect. If you can manage to make it to the center, you can simply jump on Topper and bypass the need to whittle down the stack of hats entirely. When Rango throws his hat, instead of having to knock it over and glide to the top of his head, you could just backflip and deal damage that way. Lastly, to make Harriet vulnerable, you're intended to use the giant bombs tied to her pigtails, but you can use any of the bombs she throws at you if you get the angle right. After you damage her, she'll go inside of her hat and fly around the arena dropping bombs. You could wait this phase out, or you could knock a bomb she's hovering over into her hat and move her into the next phase. These are all important tricks to keep in mind if you plan to take on the Dark Side of the Moon's boss gauntlet at the end of the game. You'll fight each Brutal back to back with just one opportunity to gain back lost health toward the end. For some, this can be one of the toughest challenges the game throws at you, but with enough familiarity with the nuances of these enemies, you'll breeze right through it. At the end of the gauntlet is a fight against a giant wooden mech piloted by all 4 Brutals that you'll need to knock down and destroy each cockpit window to damage. You'll first fight this boss in Bowser's Kingdom, but it returns as the finale of the Dark Side challenge. This fight is very straightforward, and I honestly don't care for it much at all as a result, but it makes sense as a conclusion to both of the kingdoms it appears in. The final Brutal-related boss in the game is Madame Brutal, who initially appears in the Cascade Kingdom. She has this golden chain chomp that she walks on a leash, and it'll try to attack you throughout the fight. The Cascade Kingdom does a very good job teaching you how you should engage with this boss, and so I like it as a final test of the area, but not much beyond that. It accomplishes what it sets out to do, and that's that. A contender for one of my favorite bosses in the game manifests in the Sand Kingdom. The underground icy region I mentioned earlier concludes with a fight against Knuckletech. For starters, he's got a super cool design. It's based on the Olmec colossal head sculptures from ancient Mesoamerica, and he has a ton of very expressive facial features you'll witness throughout the fight. Knuckletech is the latest entry in the list of Nintendo bosses with 2 floating hands, and I definitely consider him my favorite. He'll start by knocking down a bunch of icicles onto the arena, and then try to flatten you with his hand. The key is to stand on or near one of these icicles, and have him slam it to hurt his hand. Then, you'll capture his hand and pummel his face with it. The fight is telegraphed in such a way that you always feel like you're dodging an attack by the skin of your teeth, and it has such a frenetic energy. Pair that with one of the most visually interesting bosses and arenas the series has ever seen, and you've got a winner. I won't pretend I have much to say about the next couple of bosses, so let's just fly through them. Torque Drift of the Wooded Kingdom is a neat fight. I like how different it is from the typical Mario boss fight, where you aren't damaging them directly for most of it. It's got its own distinct interpretation of the forest meets machinery theme that I really like. Mecha Wiggler has a great lead up to it throughout the Metro Kingdom, changing it into a dark, stormy hellscape. The fight itself is incredibly simple and easy, but I can't deny that the sense of scale it displays is compelling in its own right. Cookatiel is fine. This fight usually doesn't take me very long because you can force it into its next phase early by jumping into its stomach. I always forget that this one is even in the game, honestly, even though there isn't anything about it that's necessarily bad. Easily my least favorite boss in the game is Molluscule Lanceur in the Seaside Kingdom. He's this flying octopus that will never do anything apart from floating away from you and shooting cone-shaped shells at you. That's it. You'll need to fly a gushion over his head and spray a stream of water on it to clear off the lava and damage him. The issue is that you'll frequently need to refill your gushion's water supply, as the boss is quite fast and hard to catch up to. Once you do manage to catch up to him, You can only attack him by shooting the water straight down, meaning you aren't able to adjust your horizontal position. He can randomly do this spin move that makes him invincible for a couple of seconds, and that takes him out of his stun lock and allows him to start flying away again. It's an absolute slog of a fight, and one of the lowest points of the main story to me. The final fight against Bowser is easily a high point of the game due to its extravagance. The battle itself isn't much different from the version in the Cloud Kingdom, where he throws his hat at you and jumps around the arena, but it's the ending sequence that really does it for me. Defeating him shatters the platform under your feet, and the moment the entire game has been leading up to finally arrives. You get to capture Bowser. In what might be one of the most exhilarating sequences in a Mario game, you need to escort Peach out of the Moon Cave while the entire thing comes crashing down. As Bowser, you'll destroy the rocks lying in your path while dodging the rubble falling from the sky. When the end is in sight, this kick-ass rock anthem fades in, pumping you up to knock down the last few stalagmites. Breaking the cube in the middle reveals an electric line that launches the party back to the moon's surface, and we get to watch Mario and Bowser fight over Peach. Now that's how you end a fucking Mario game. As I said before, there are 880 moons in Odyssey, and of those, you only need about an eighth of them to roll credits. After beating the game, you can return to previously visited kingdoms, and Cappy will point out an oddly shaped silver rock. These are moon rocks, and smacking them with your hat will make all new moons available to find. Here's a take you've never heard before. I'm not a big fan of these. Since you can only unlock these after completing the main story, it would have made for the perfect opportunity to add some more difficult challenges to each kingdom. But alas, the vast majority of these moons are indistinguishable from those found in the main game in terms of difficulty. Let's take a look at the Cascade Kingdom, for example. The first moon made available by the kingdom's moon rock is Bottom of the Waterfall Basin, in which you ground pound a glowing spot under the bridge. There's also Next to the Stone Arch, where you notice a moon floating by the side of the boss arena walkway, and just have to fall to collect it. There's Treasure Under the Cliff, which requires you to throw Cappy at 2 cloud platforms to reach the moon. This all sounds pretty simple, right? I managed to grab like 4 moons in the span of a minute or two, in the post-game. One of the secret rooms that becomes accessible via the moon rock revolves around bridges and gusts of wind. The hidden moon for this one is practically not even hidden. About halfway through the level, you find this lever along your path, but the camera points you directly at another switch behind it. There's a breeze blowing straight at it, and so naturally you toss your hat at it. The game asks you to throw your hat at it once more, and that's all it takes to find the hidden moon. This would have been acceptable if it were not unlocked in the post-game. The entire point of these hidden moons is to make you think about the secret rooms in a new way and experiment. I don't think I'm asking for Ninja Gaiden here, I just would have expected at least a little more challenge in the post-game. You would think the point of the moon rocks is to keep new players from entering more difficult levels on accident, instead of ones that try to teach the fundamentals of the game, but it's actually the complete opposite. The moon rocks are here to keep players from collecting a ton of easy moons and bypassing the story content in each kingdom. In practice, they make you re-explore the entire level again with virtually no engaging alterations. The game just stays the course for the most part. It contributes to the mindlessness of collecting moons in this game, and it ensures that very little of them stand out in your memory. In theory, I like the moon rocks and what they could have been, but their execution leaves a lot to be desired. Some greater challenge in the post-game would have helped their objectives stand out a bit more and cut down on the monotony. Luckily, the game is not completely devoid of challenging missions. After collecting 250 moons, you unlock a secret kingdom called the Dark Side of the Moon. It may appear small, but it is densely packed with some of the toughest levels you've yet faced. What I love about these moons is that they're remixed versions of previous levels, each with its own unique twists and challenges. One of my favorites is Vanishing Road Rush, which is the exact same secret level from the Metro Kingdom, where you have to ride across sections of platforms on a motor scooter under the gun of a timer. Only this time, you don't have a motor scooter or Cappy. That's right, you're left with Mario's base movement to cross these platforms, and the timing is strict. As I've said, I cherish any opportunity I get to demonstrate my mastery over Mario's movement, and this level does that phenomenally well. There's also Breakdown Road, which is originally found in the Wooded Kingdom. Basically, you're meant to capture these bonsai bills at the end of the stage and use them to break the blocks concealing the moon. The dark side version doesn't allow you to bring Cappy with you, meaning you can't capture anything. To accommodate this change, there are new blocks at the bottom of the level, with gaps between them just small enough to long jump across. You have to perform 8 perfect long jumps in succession with a bonsai bill pursuing you to clear this stage. I know a lot of people struggle with this one, but I've gotten pretty consistent with it, so I rarely die. Regardless, the threat of bonking is very real, and I find this level exhilarating to play through every time. Darkside also contains loads of hint art, another category of moon. These images depict abstract representations of certain areas and kingdoms, hinting at locations of hidden moons, hence the name. These are some of the most enjoyable moons to hunt down, since many of them require some deliberation. A few of them pretty blatantly spell out where you need to go and what you need to do, but these are the exception rather than the rule. The one that leads you to the Cap Kingdom is one of my favorites, since the Top Hat Tower immediately clues you in on where you should go, but perfectly lining up the moon to match the image is tricky. It's one of the simpler ones, but I have fun with it nonetheless. The Lost Kingdom moon is another favorite of mine because of how obtuse it appears. It just shows an extremely up-close shot of dirt with a shadow cast over it, and it gives you little to go off of. Finally finding that moon is intensely gratifying. Hint art is one of the few types of moons I wouldn't mind being endlessly recycled. I just really enjoy that sort of detective work. I always look forward to visiting the dark side in my replays of this game. Like some of the more recent 3D titles, Odyssey features a difficult endgame level, the darker side of the moon. It is definitely one of the easiest final stages in the series, but it does a great job at feeling conclusive. Most of the mechanics you've encountered throughout your adventure are present here, contributing to the feeling that you're being tested on everything you've learned. One interesting thing about this level is that it's fairly easy to skip big chunks of it with some cheeky tricks. Hitting these tornadoes at a certain angle with Glide On will launch you high into the air, allowing you to land on a nearby platform that brings you to one of the final sections. In addition to that, there are ample opportunities to replenish lost health, so the level provides plenty of options for those who may be struggling. Truthfully, I don't care to discuss the gimmicks this level throws at you, or the ways in which it is designed to test you, or any of that. No, I love it for a reason that not even the game itself could have facilitated. The first time I completed the darker side of the moon was on my 18th birthday. After clearing the level, there's this massive tower that you have to climb to the top of. While you're doing that, Cappy will comment on how far you've come together, and reflect on your journey thus far. I've talked about it on this channel before, but some of the earliest memories I've made were playing Mario games. Galaxy 1 and 2 were the games that solidified my love of video games, and when I wasn't replaying those for the 100th time, I was playing New Super Mario Bros., Mario Kart, Luigi's Mansion, or some variety of Mario sports. So hearing Cappy's musings on how much he enjoyed taking this adventure with me on my very first day of adulthood, after overcoming such a demanding challenge, prompted me to reflect on not only my adventure, but my entire life. This moment made me feel like I was saying goodbye to my childhood in a way. Odyssey felt like the Mario games I played as a kid all grown up, and this level marked the end of my first time playing through it. On a personal level, I owe a lot to this game. It was arguably the game that reinvigorated my interest in single-player games, and without that stepping stone, I wouldn't be here making these videos. I wouldn't have connected with some friends I really cherish, and it might sound a bit melodramatic, but my life would look totally different. Games are far and away my #1 hobby. I'm always thinking about them, discussing them, writing about them, and playing them. Odyssey helped mold that love as a teenager, and no matter what I say about it, I can't help but cherish it. Super Mario Odyssey might be the 3D Mario with the most going for it, and also the most going against it. It allows for more freedom than any other Mario game, but that comes at the cost of watering down every possible objective. Because of the abundance of moons, each playthrough is allowed to be vastly different from prior ones. However, if they really wanted to lean into this philosophy, moon rocks should have never existed. The kingdoms are all mostly strong, but the dullness of the game's moons do all they can to disincentivize you from seeing all they have to offer. The movement is the best the series has to offer, bar none, and combined with the capture mechanic, makes for some of the most fun you can have controlling a character in a 3D platformer. There's simply no denying that I enjoy playing Odyssey a lot in the moment, but I don't really like reflecting on the details of its gameplay all that much. In that sense, it reminds me a lot of Sunshine. In fact, my praises and criticisms of both games have a lot in common. All I can hope is that we see a similar course correction as Sunshine to Galaxy for the modern era, and judging by Nintendo's bite-sized 3D Mario experiment in 2021, I'm optimistic. Odyssey represents a new age for 3D Mario, one that tastefully fuses old and new, and lays the foundation for something greater down the line. And regardless of what form it takes, I'm certain it'll be an adventure worth embarking on. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.